Hello, today I'm here to talk to you about the audiobooks that I listened to in June. There's not that many this month because I was away for a week of the month, so I didn't listen to any audiobooks then. And also I have been kind of slowing it down with the audiobook listening this month. I've kind of not been feeling the audio love, but then I've not been feeling the book love this month, which you'll know if you've seen my other wrap-ups. And I think that has kind of merged into my audio life. But anyway, I've still got 3 to talk to you about, so without further ado, I started with How to Build a Girl by Caitlin Moran, read by Louise Brealey, I think that is. This is Caitlin Moran's YA fiction book, and I've kind of avoided it so far because I think a lot of people said that it was basically like her feminist non-fiction for adults, How to Be a Woman, but for young kids and fictionalised, so I didn't really bother picking this up. However, when I saw it on Daily Deals on Audible, I thought I would give it a go, and I'm really glad I did actually. Yes, you could argue that this is kind of just Caitlin Moran's life again. She does always seem to write the same thing, and it's all just about her growing up in Wolverhampton, and the experiences that she's had, and it's funny nonetheless, but it is always the same plot. However, I really enjoyed this anyway. I think it's been long enough since I've read any other Caitlin Moran that it was fresh enough in my head. I would say if you've watched her comedy that she did on Channel 4 a few years ago, I think it was called Raised by Wolves, this is a lot like that, and I have a feeling, I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure that the character in Raised by Wolves was called Johanna. Just a suspicion, and the girl in this book is called Johanna as well, funnily enough. But I really enjoyed this. It's hilarious. It kind of depicts basically this girl, Johanna, who is growing up in Wolverhampton in a poor family, who are living on benefits because her father is disabled, but he has this dream of being a musician one day, so he's constantly trying to rope like music producers and stuff into listening to this self-made album that's not really very good. Johanna is kind of the oldest of her group of siblings, and it's just about their trials and tribulations to start with, and then Johanna starts to break into the world of the music industry by becoming a music reviewer. And we then look at her experiences in the music industry as a young girl, and you know, how she starts smoking and starts having sex. The sex scenes in here are laugh out loud hilarious. I don't think I've ever read such funny sex scenes. There is one scene where oral sex is involved and Johanna ends up being sick in her mouth. I think let's just leave that there, really. But this is really funny and really heartwarming at the same time. It's kind of just about growing up in difficult situation and trying to make the best of your life. And yeah, I just really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would recommend it. Even if you think it's going to be a bit samey, it manages to be funny enough and unique enough that I think it stands up on its own right. So I would still recommend this. And also, the audio narration was really quite fantastic, so I would recommend that as well. Then I listened to I Am by Maggie O'Farrell. This was narrated by Daisy Donovan. Now this book has kind of been on my radar for a while, even though I have never read a Maggie O'Farrell fiction book, but I've seen this around and it's kind of sounded intriguing, and I really like the title. And then I watched Jen's walking and reading series, and she was listening to this and said that she really enjoyed it, so I thought I would finally get around to it. And this is basically a memoir which looks at the different situations in Maggie O'Farrell's life where she's, the way that it's described is that it's her brushes with death, but I would say more accurately it's her brushes with moments where her life flashes before her eyes almost, you know, life-shattering moments that kind of teach you on the brink of potentially verging into the dangerous at times. Sometimes there are blatant death brushes, and other times it's just kind of moments where she thinks about her own mortality. It starts with a really petrifying scene which really chilled me to the bone, because I go for walks on my own every day, and I go for walks by a river in a very quiet area on my own most days. So this really scared me, but when she was about 17 and had her first job, Maggie O'Farrell went for a walk around the river by her job quite often. She bumped into a man who put her on edge. He was talking to her and kind of making her feel uncomfortable, and he was bird watching, and he put his binoculars around her neck and sort of was trying to get her to look through these binoculars, and she was very uncomfortable, so she made her excuses, kind of walked off and went straight to the police, who didn't take her seriously because this guy hadn't actually done anything, and a few days later the police come to her workplace and she has to identify this man because he has strangled a girl with his binocular strap. And that kind of throws you right into it, and there are a few situations like this where Maggie O'Farrell has come across some quite yeah, her life's not been full of luck, but she's overcome all of these and she's talking about sort of her thoughts and feelings during each incident. I would say, disclaimer, that I think this book is probably not the best for people who are very anxious about situations like this. There's certainly, in terms of Maggie O'Farrell's birth stories, it really did start me getting a bit anxious, but I would highly recommend this. I think Maggie O'Farrell is a really beautiful writer and she's a really interesting woman, and it's just fascinating. I think especially if you're a writer, because there is obviously a lot of stuff in here about Maggie O'Farrell's journey with writing as well. I would just recommend it. I think it was wonderful and I definitely want to pick up Maggie O'Farrell's fiction from now on. And then I finished with Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell. This was narrated by Jeremy Northam. I didn't like this, but I have a feeling that it's more my fault than the book's fault. I just kind of, I wasn't bothered about listening to it, so I didn't overly push myself to listen to it fast or pick it up when I should have done perhaps, and yeah, I just didn't have that drive to listen to it. Basically, this is a non-fiction account of George Orwell's time on the streets. He first lives on the streets in Paris, but he lives a very destitute life and he doesn't have a job and he's surviving off of really small amounts of money each day. And then we follow him going to London for the second half of the book, where he actually does live on the streets for a while. I think listening to this wasn't possibly the best idea. I actually think it would suit better the reading format. But I generally don't get on with George Orwell, much to my partner's disgrace, because George Orwell is his god, basically. But I just don't find that George Orwell's writing ever really captures me. And I've never been able to 100% say why. But listening to this made me realise absolutely what the problem with me and George Orwell is that he writes very much like a reporter rather than a writer, and I kind of think I knew that in a way already. Like 1984, I enjoyed it, I enjoyed the concepts, I enjoyed the world, but I felt like there was just something missing. And I think the issue is that George Orwell he's a passive writer, he's not an active writer. He doesn't, even in this where it's a non-fiction about his life, he doesn't put himself into the story. And I know some people would say it's George Orwell, that's a really pickety point and what is the problem. But for me, I just find that it keeps me at a distance from the story. So yes, while he's talking about these really important political issues and talking about this really important situation of people living on the streets, I just couldn't bring myself to care because he wasn't putting me into the action. He wasn't putting himself into the action. He was viewing it all through a very passive lens, and it kind of, for me, it removes the urgency and it removes the impact. And obviously there were some really impactful moments in here. There were, you know, devastating scenes, and you grew to love these characters, and just, you know, you couldn't believe the way that they were being treated by society and generally the hard luck that they were having. Ultimately, yeah, this didn't overly speak to me. I gave it 3 stars. I'm aware that that's a harsh judgment for this book because it is loved and it's a classic and it's a really famous text. But I feel like it was too passive for me. As I say, it might have been the listening experience as well, because that was another step removed. I would like to read it one day because this is one of my partner's favourites, but for me it just didn't quite have the impact that I was hoping it would have, and I didn't quite get the emotion that I was expecting from it, so it was a bit of a letdown for me. So that is all of the audiobooks that I listened to this month. Please let me know down below if you've been listening to any good books this month, and I will see you next time. Bye!